Hello, and welcome to today's Quick Plays video on value 4-betting preflop. A good value 4-betting strategy is a great way to maximize value with your monster hands, although defining a monster hand can be difficult once our hand shifts away from aces and kings. In this video I'll show you what a value 4-bet is, when to make them, and vital details like 4-bet sizing. In this first example, we open raise with aces from the cutoff to 3, and the small blind 3-bets us to 10. Just to make sure we all have the nomenclature correct, our initial $3 raise is the open raise, and the small blind's re-raise to 10 is the 3-bet, and if we re-raise that, it's called a 4-bet. If you are new to poker jargon, this may seem a bit confusing, but a 3-bet is the first re-raise preflop, and a 4-bet is simply a re-raise of a 3-bet. Let's back up a second and consider how we should react to the small blind's 3-bet. At this point we have three options. We can fold, call the 3-bet, or 4-bet. Now we're never going to fold aces here, so our decision is really just between calling the 3-bet and 4-betting. Many players would simply look at their own hole cards, see those beautiful aces, and 4-bet without a second thought. But that's not a complete rationale when value 4-betting preflop. 4-betting for value doesn't just mean that we are ahead of our opponent's 3-betting range. It means that we are ahead of the range that he would continue with against our 4-bet. Of course, this is extremely easy to visualize with aces, since it will always be ahead of a range that villain would call our 4-bet or 5-bet with. Even against a nutted range of kings plus, our aces has a huge equity edge. The key thing to take away from this is that you can't just look at the range villain would 3-bet you with. You need to think about the range he'd give your 4-bet action with. As your hand gets weaker and weaker, it makes value 4-betting tougher and tougher. And just because an opponent 3-bets super aggressively and with lots of bluff hands, doesn't necessarily mean he'll give your 4-bet action with anything but a strong range. The last thing to note here is the size. A typical 4-bet size is going to be between 20 to 25 big blinds. This is a very purposeful size. First is that it doesn't put in more than 1/3 of the effective stack preflop, assuming you both started with 80 big blinds or more. A golden rule in poker is that you don't put in more than 1/3 of your effective stack unless you would always call an all-in preflop. This is because the price you would get against a shove would be too good not to call, even with less than stellar hands. The second reason for this size is that it also makes a great bluff 4-bet size. We'll discuss bluff 4-betting in another video, but if we keep our bluff and value 4-bet sizes similar, it will make it tougher for our opponent to figure out what we actually have. So our 4-bet size up to 22 is a great size to use here. If villain just calls, it creates a very small SPR going to the flop, and if villain shoves, well, it's a very easy call for us. We won't win every single time, but we'll win huge pots quite often. In this next example we have jacks and open raise from middle position. The button 3-bets us to 10 and it folds back to us. Now jacks is much weaker than the previous aces, making this a bit tougher of a situation. Let's think for a moment if 4-betting is really going to be valuable. Let's assume for a moment that the button is 3-betting us with exactly queens plus ace king. If we 4-bet, will he ever fold any of those hands? If not, then we are creating a huge pot when we only have 36% equity against his range. This would not be a value 4-bet since we are not ahead of the range villain would give our 4-bet action with. What if the button were 3-betting a range of queens plus ace king, ace deuce, ace 3, 9-7, and 6-4? Now can we 4-bet for value? Well, the truth is that we don't have enough information yet. Remember, just because we're ahead of his 3-betting range does not mean a 4-bet would actually be best. If we 4-bet here and he would fold his bluffy hands, then we are in the same conundrum as the previous spot where he'd only give our 4-bet action with hands that crush us. In order for this 4-bet to be for value, he would need to continue, either by 5-betting or calling our 4-bet, with those weak hands so that we have an equity edge against his continuing range. If you know villain will 5-bet bluff shove many of his weak hands, then you could certainly value 4-bet and snap call his shove. But you need a decent amount of information before making that kind of play. Of course, if the button would 3-bet and give our 4-bet action with a range that we dominate, ideally including a mix of bluffs and second best pairs like 10s and 9s, the more we could 4-bet for value. If a 4-bet would only turn our hand into a bluff, and it likely wouldn't get him to fold queens plus ace king, then our only options are between calling and folding. Which option you choose is debatable, but as your hand reading skills improve, the correct option becomes very clear. That is value 4-betting in a nutshell. We think about the range villain would 3-bet us with, and with what range he would give our 4-bet action with. If we have an edge on the range he would give our 4-bet action with, it's a value 4-bet. If villain would only give our 4-bet action with a range that dominates us, a 4-bet would only turn our hand into a bluff. This distinction is very similar to value 3-betting, and of course value 5-betting, but it's vital to understand if you want to play those strong starting hands better pre-flop. Same as always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. Otherwise, good luck and happy grinding.